Hey guys, tonight we are diving deep, very deep, into the shadowy world of Victorian England, specifically into the bedrooms of those poor souls who just couldn't catch a wink of sleep. Picture this. It's late. The gas lamps outside are casting flickering, dancing shadows on your heavy velvet curtains. The coals in the grate are fading to a dull orange glow. And you are absolutely, undeniably wide awake. The silence of the house presses in, broken only by the distant clatter of a late-night cab or the mournful cry of a street vendor. And the more you try to sleep, the further it seems to flee. We'll be exploring the often bizarre, sometimes terrifying, and occasionally downright hilarious lengths Victorians went to in their quest for slumber. Given that some of these cures involved copious amounts of narcotics or questionable electrical devices, you probably wouldn't survive trying these at home, and frankly, you might not survive this podcast without drifting off, which is kind of the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing how far these little journeys reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Tonight we are diving deep, very deep, into the shadowy world of Victorian England, specifically into the bedrooms of those poor souls who just couldn't catch a wink of sleep. Picture this. It's late. The gas lamps outside are casting flickering, dancing shadows on your heavy velvet curtains. The coals in the grate are fading to a dull orange glow. And you are absolutely, undeniably wide awake. The silence of the house presses in, broken only by the distant clatter of a late-night cab or the mournful cry of a street vendor. And the more you try to sleep, the further it seems to flee. We'll be exploring the often bizarre, sometimes terrifying, and occasionally downright hilarious lengths Victorians went to in their quest for slumber. Given that some of these cures involved copious amounts of narcotics or questionable electrical devices, you probably wouldn't survive trying these at home, and frankly, you might not survive this podcast without drifting off, which is kind of the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing how far these little journeys reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The darkness that settles around you now isn't the manufactured, almost theatrical darkness of a modern power outage. No, this is a deeper, more profound absence of light, the kind that existed before cities hummed with a perpetual electric glow. You're in a Victorian home, perhaps in the heart of London, or maybe a quieter, more genteel provincial town. The gaslight from the street below, if you're lucky enough to have it, casts long, wavering shadows that turn familiar furniture into monstrous shapes. You shift restlessly on your mattress, which might be stuffed with horsehair or feathers, a far cry from memory foam. It rustles beneath you, a small, intimate sound in the vast quiet of the night. Your bedroom is a fortress against the night, or at least it tries to be. Those thick, imposing velvet curtains, heavy enough to stop not just light, but possibly a runaway hansom cab if it took a very, very wrong turn into your upstairs boudoir, are drawn tight. Yet, the sounds of the city, or even the country, have a way of seeping in. The distant rumble of an early morning cart heading to market, the mournful howl of a dog, the creak of the floorboards in the hallway as the house settles around you like an old ship. These are the sounds that accompany your unwelcome wakefulness. You might find yourself staring at the patterns on the wallpaper, perhaps a William Morris design of swirling acanthus leaves, which seem to writhe and twist in the faint light trickling in from a poorly snuffed oil lamp or the dying embers in the fireplace. The air itself feels different, heavier, perhaps, carrying the faint, lingering scent of coal smoke, beeswax polish, and maybe even a hint of damp if your home isn't one of the newly built, better ventilated ones. It's a world away from our centrally heated, air-filtered bedrooms. It's in this environment that you, our sleepless Victorian, begin to truly feel your insomnia. And you are not alone. While people have undoubtedly suffered from sleeplessness throughout history, the Victorian era saw it emerge as a distinct, widely discussed medical and social concern. Historians still argue whether the perceived rise in insomnia was due to a genuine increase in the condition or simply greater medical and public attention being paid to it. As literacy expanded and the press began to cover such ailments more frequently, whatever the reason, the feeling of being uniquely afflicted by the inability to achieve oblivion was becoming a common narrative. The very pace of life was starting to quicken, new anxieties bubbling to the surface, which we'll delve into more deeply soon. But for now, imagine the simple act of gaslighting, a marvel of the age, extending the day, pushing back the natural curtain of night. This meant more time for work, yes, but also more time for worry, for social engagements that ran late, for reading stimulating novels by that soft, flickering glow, making the brain buzz when it should be winding down. Sound familiar? Perhaps the blue light of our screens is just the modern echo of that Victorian gas lamp. And then there was the air itself, especially if you were in a bustling metropolis like London. During the summer of 1858, the city experienced what came to be known as the Great Stink. The River Thames, choked with raw sewage and industrial waste, essentially began to cook in the heat, releasing an olfactory assault so profound that Parliament had to drape its windows with curtains soaked in chloride of lime. Imagine trying to drift off to sleep with that miasma seeping into your very being. It's no wonder people were desperate for relief, even without such dramatic environmental events. The general air quality in industrial cities, thick with coal smoke and factory emissions, could hardly have been conducive to easy breathing or peaceful sleep. As you lie there, tossing and turning, you might recall snippets of advice you've read or heard. Perhaps someone mentioned the importance of the direction in which you sleep. A quirky, though not uncommon, belief at the time was that aligning your bed so your head pointed north, in harmony with the Earth's magnetic field, could promote tranquility and improve sleep. This magnetic alignment was thought to soothe the nerves, though historians still debate whether sleeping facing south actively summoned gremlins or just led to a crick in the neck. It's one of those little details, a folk belief clinging on even as science was making great strides. The silence of your room, once a comfort, now feels like an accusation. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall below seems to amplify your frustration. Why can't you just sleep? It's the classic catch, 22, isn't it? The original Victorian, I can't sleep because I'm actively thinking about how I can't sleep. They were true pioneers in the art of sleep-related anxiety. This wasn't just a physical state. It was becoming a mental burden, a sign, some thought, of an overstimulated mind or a troubled conscience. The night, for you and many of your contemporaries, is no longer a guaranteed period of rest and restoration, but a battleground where you wrestle with unseen demons of wakefulness, armed with very little effective weaponry. The weight of the impending day, with all its duties and expectations, presses down, making the quest for even a few hours of oblivion all the more desperate. And it's this desperation, this deep societal yearning for rest in an increasingly restless world, that will lead us to explore some truly peculiar attempts at finding sleep. That desperation you feel, lying awake in your Victorian bed, isn't just a personal failing, a peculiar quirk of your own constitution. It's a symptom of the age, a faint but persistent thrumming beneath the surface of this era of unprecedented change. The world outside your window, the very air you breathe. The thoughts that chase sleep away, they are all being reshaped by forces that your grandparents could scarcely have imagined. The great, grinding gears of the Industrial Revolution are not just churning out cotton and steel, they are also churning out a new kind of weariness. A modern restlessness that seeps into the quietest corners of the night. You can almost hear it now, even from your relatively peaceful street, a distant, pervasive hum. The sound of a city that never truly sleeps, or perhaps the relentless thud of a nearby factory that operates through the darkest hours. For many, the soundtrack to their lives was no longer the gentle rhythm of nature, but the clang and clamor of machinery. Imagine trying to find rest when the gentle lullaby of 1,000 looms clattering in unison, punctuated by the romantic screech of steam whistles, is your constant companion. This wasn't just noise. It was a declaration that the old, sun-dictated cadences of life were being supplanted by the unyielding demands of the machine. This new industrial heartbeat brought with it a profound shift in how people lived and worked. For those who toiled in the burgeoning factories and mills, the tyranny of the clock tower replaced the sun as the arbiter of daily life. Long hours, often in grueling conditions, were standard, and for some, the introduction of shift work meant their bodies were constantly fighting against their natural inclination to sleep when it was dark and wake when it was light. Their internal clocks, so to speak, were being systematically dismantled piece by piece with each ringing of the factory bell. Historians still uncover records detailing the sheer exhaustion faced by the working classes. An exhaustion so deep that true, restorative sleep became a precious, often elusive, commodity, as people flocked from the countryside to these new centers of industry. Cities swelled at an astonishing rate. Your own London, or Manchester, or Birmingham is likely more crowded, more densely packed than ever before. This rapid urbanization often meant that families were crammed into poorly built tenements, with inadequate sanitation and scant personal space, trying to sleep in a room shared with several others, with the noises and smells of a crowded building pressing in from all sides. While perhaps the acrid smell of coal smoke from a nearby factory chimney fills the air, it's a recipe for frayed nerves and sleepless nights. There was a pervasive belief in miasma. The idea that bad air, emanating from filth or decay, was a primary cause of disease, while germ theory was slowly gaining ground. Many Victorians believed these noxious effluvia also contributed to general ill health and, yes, poor sleep, leading to sometimes frantic and often quite peculiar attempts to ventilate homes, even if it meant letting in more of the soot-filled city air. Beyond the physical discomforts, a new kind of psychological pressure was building. You, perhaps as a member of the burgeoning middle class, might be experiencing what was often termed an affliction of the nerves. This rather vague but ubiquitous condition, sometimes diagnosed as neurasthenia, was seen as a direct consequence of the accelerated pace of modern life, the increased intellectual demands, and the relentless pursuit of progress. Symptoms included fatigue, anxiety, headaches, and almost invariably insomnia. Apparently, thinking too hard about railway shares, the latest political crisis, or the complex moral dilemmas presented in a popular 3-volume novel could literally scare sleep away. Our modern equivalent might be doom-scrolling social media feeds or checking stock prices at 3 a.m. Different content, same overstimulated brain. This wasn't just a personal worry. It was a societal one. The Victorians placed enormous value on industry, productivity, and self-improvement. The devil finds work for idle hands was a common refrain, and perhaps in the quiet, wakeful hours of the night, you feel a twinge of guilt for your own idleness, your inability to efficiently dispatch yourself into unconsciousness. Sleep itself was almost viewed as something to be conquered, managed, and made efficient, rather than a natural process to surrender to. This pressure to be constantly striving, constantly achieving, could easily spill over into the night, transforming the bed from a place of rest into a place of anxious self-assessment. The early 19th century saw the Luddite movement, or textile workers, fearing their skills were becoming obsolete due to new machinery, famously smashed loaves. While this was a few decades before the mid-Victorian period we're focusing on, the underlying anxiety about technological change and its impact on human lives certainly persisted. The relentless march of invention, the constant introduction of new machines and new ways of doing things, created an undercurrent of instability. Was your trade secure? Could you keep up? These were the kinds of worries that could easily fester in the stillness of 2 a.m. And then there was the information. The Victorian era witnessed an explosion in printed material. Newspapers became cheaper and more widespread. Periodicals catering to every conceivable interest flourished, and novels were consumed with a voracious appetite. You might have spent your evening reading the latest installment of a Dickens serial or a stirring account of colonial adventures, or perhaps a rather alarming medical article about the perils of poor digestion. They didn't have Twitter, of course, but a triple-decker novel full of dramatic misfortune, societal critique, and complex social maneuvering could probably keep your brain buzzing just as effectively as any modern digital rabbit hole. This newfound access to information, while celebrated, also meant more for the mind to process, more to stimulate and potentially agitate. Even the very social fabric, with its strict codes of conduct and emphasis on emotional restraint, could contribute to your sleeplessness. Feelings that couldn't be openly expressed during the day, frustrations, disappointments, unspoken desires, might well choose the quiet vulnerability of the night to make their presence known, replaying conversations, rehearsing anxieties, and generally making a nuisance of themselves when all you crave is oblivion. Historians still argue whether the Victorian focus on nerves and the associated insomnia was a genuine medical phenomenon driven by these new societal stresses, or, in part, a fashionable diagnosis that medicalized the everyday anxieties of a rapidly changing world, offering a sort of socially acceptable outlet for distress. Regardless, the effect on your sleep is the same. The night stretches on, and the dawn seems a very long way off. The city hums, your mind races, and the quest for a simple night's rest feels increasingly complex. The city outside may hum with an anxious energy. Your own mind might be a hive of restless thoughts. But surely, you reason, there must be some simple, tangible way to coax your body into surrender. If the world itself is unsettling your sleep, perhaps something as fundamental as what you consume before retiring could offer a counterbalance, a gentle nudge towards the land of naught. And so, your attention, like that of many fellow Victorians, turns towards the dining room and the pantry, seeking slumber through sustenance. The evening meal, or supper, in your Victorian household, often taken quite late, is typically no light affair. Yes, a 7-course meal featuring perhaps some robust roast beef, a hefty suet pudding, several types of savory or sweet pie, all followed by a hefty slab of cheese and washed down with ale or porter, was considered by some the perfect prelude to, well, to profound indigestion, mostly, but sleep too, hopefully. The prevailing theory, you see, was that a substantial meal would draw blood away from the overactive brain towards the stomach to aid digestion, thereby calming the mind and inviting drowsiness. It's a logic that feels intuitively plausible, even if the reality often involved heartburn and a night spent regretting that third helping of game pie. Because of this, there was also a good deal of advice, often contradictory, floating about regarding what not to eat if you wished for a peaceful night. Spicy foods, rich sauces, and anything too exciting for the palate were generally frowned upon for the evening repast. Certain vegetables, like cucumbers, radishes, and onions, were deemed particularly troublesome, liable to repeat on one and disturb the delicate digestive process that was supposedly key to good sleep. Tea and coffee, those beloved beverages of the Victorian age, were viewed with a certain ambivalence. While many relied on their stimulating properties to get through the day, there was a growing awareness, even then, that a strong cup of tea or coffee taken too close to bedtime might be the very culprit keeping you staring at the ceiling. Of course, for every person who avoided evening tea, there was another who swore by their customary cuppa, perhaps rationalizing that its warmth and familiarity were soothing in themselves. If rich suppers were one approach, then the opposite, bland, easily digestible foods, was another popular route to sought-after sleep. You might find yourself preparing a small bowl of warm milk, perhaps with a grating of nutmeg or a discreet spoonful of honey. This is a remedy that has trickled down through generations, hasn't it? The comforting warmth, the gentle sweetness. Sometimes, a tot of brandy or wine might be added to the milk, creating a posset, an old-fashioned remedy believed to settle the nerves and encourage sleep. Gruel, that rather unglamorous concoction of oats or other grains boiled with water or milk, was another staple for those seeking a gentle night. It was warm, filling in a non-threatening way, and believed to be exceptionally easy on the stomach. Think of it as the Victorian equivalent of a sleep-inducing smoothie, minus the kale and chia seeds. Then there were the digestible biscuits. These weren't your decadent, chocolate-dunked delights of the modern era. Oh no. Think of them as the beige Volvo of the biscuit world, safe, reliable, and profoundly unlikely to cause any undue excitement, digestive or otherwise. Brands like Huntley and Palmer's produced arrowroot biscuits or Osborne biscuits, often marketed towards invalids or those with delicate constitutions, but quickly adopted by the sleepless as a suitably bland pre-bedtime snack. The idea was to have something plain in the stomach to absorb any troublesome acids, without giving your digestive system a Herculean task to perform while you were trying to do Morpheus. Of course, no discussion of Victorian evening rituals would be complete without mentioning the nightcap in its more spirited form. A glass of wine, a nip of brandy, a comforting measure of porter or ale. These were common go-tos for inducing that relaxed, drowsy feeling. Alcohol was widely seen as a sedative, a way to soften the sharp edges of the day and ease the transition into sleep. What wasn't perhaps so well understood then was alcohol's rather disruptive effect on sleep architecture, often leading to a fragmented and less restful night. even if it helped you drop off initially. It's a fine line between a gentle soporific and a recipe for a restless, groggy morning. A line that was undoubtedly crossed with regularity. The burgeoning world of branded food products also began to play its part in the quest for calm. This was an era of emerging advertising, and companies were quick to promote their wares with health claims. Cadbury's Cocoa Essence, for example, was advertised not just as a nourishing drink, but also as one that was soothing and refreshing, subtly hinting at its benefits for a troubled mind and, by extension, troubled sleep. You might find yourself sipping such a cocoa, hoping its purported purity and digestibility would work some gentle magic. Historians still argue whether the Victorian emphasis on heavy suppers as a sleep aid was based on any genuine physiological understanding, however rudimentary, or simply a cultural holdover from earlier, more physically demanding lifestyles where a large evening meal was necessary fuel. Amidst these more conventional dietary approaches, there were, as always, some rather more quirky beliefs. One such notion involved lettuce. Yes, the humble garden lettuce, particularly the wild variety known as Lactuca virosa or lettuce opium, was believed to possess mild sedative properties. People would sometimes consume lettuce sandwiches late in the evening, or even just munch on the leaves, hoping its natural lacticarium content would lull them to sleep. Imagine a rather proper Victorian lady or gentleman, desperately trying to be discreet while munching through an entire head of romaine at midnight, earnestly hoping to drift off. The only thing they were likely to induce was a surprised rabbit, or perhaps just a feeling of being rather full of, well, lettuce. So you lie there, perhaps having opted for a light, digestible biscuit and a cup of warm, spiced milk. Or maybe you're still contending with the after effects of that rather ambitious joint of mutton from supper. You consider the spices, the richness, the timing of your intake. You've navigated the advice from doctors, grandmothers, and the ever-so-helpful ladies' magazines. Yet, the shadows still dance on the ceiling, and sleep remains a coy, elusive visitor. The quest through diet, it seems, is just one more avenue explored, one more set of rules to follow in the increasingly complex game of chasing slumber in this rapidly changing world. So, the warm milk has been sipped, the digestible biscuits dutifully consumed. Perhaps you even valiantly chewed your way through a head of lettuce, and yet, here you are, still awake. The gentle dietary nudges have failed to tip you into the abyss of slumber, and that familiar frustration, that growing desperation, begins to whisper more insistent suggestions. When the subtle arts of the kitchen prove insufficient, your gaze, like that of so many of your contemporaries, might drift towards the chemist's shop, or even the unassuming bottles tucked away in your own medicine cabinet, promising a deeper, more certain oblivion. You're now entering the realm of laudanum's lullaby and morphine's murmur, where sleep could be bought by the vial, though often at a hidden, creeping cost. It's almost difficult for us to comprehend from our modern vantage point of tightly controlled pharmaceuticals just how readily available opium and its derivatives were in Victorian England. You wouldn't necessarily need a doctor's note, a lengthy consultation, or a trip to a specialized pharmacy. Laudanum, that potent tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, often sweetened with sugar or spiced with cinnamon or saffron, could be purchased from the local chemist, the grocer, sometimes even from a traveling salesman or a corner shop. You could pop down for a loaf of bread, a pound of sugar, and a bottle of something to render you unconscious for 8 solid hours. One-stop shopping at its most efficient, and, in retrospect, most alarming. Laudanum was, in many ways, the aspirin or paracetamol of the 19th century, a ubiquitous remedy for a bewildering array of ailments: coughs, colds, diarrhea, rheumatism, neuralgia, anxiety, women's troubles, and, of course, that persistent, nagging inability to sleep. Laudanum was the answer. Its effects were undeniable. A few drops, carefully measured, or perhaps not so carefully as the night wore on, dripped into a glass of water or a cup of tea, or even taken neat, would begin to weave their magic. A warmth might spread through your limbs, anxieties would seem to fuzz at the edges, and the insistent chatter of your mind would gradually soften, replaced by a heavy, dreamlike state that would, eventually, pull you under. It wasn't always true, restful sleep. Often more of a stupor, but it was an escape from the torment of wakefulness, and for many, that was enough. This wasn't just an adult indulgence, either. Countless Victorian infants and young children were routinely dosed with soothing syrups like Godfrey's cordial or Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, many of which had laudanum or other opiates as their active ingredient. Godfrey's cordial, the secret weapon of many a Victorian nanny and overwrought mother. Baby won't sleep through the night? A little dab of this sweet, opium-laced syrup should do the trick. Childcare standards and understandings of infant physiology were decidedly different. The aim was quiet, and these preparations delivered, though at the cost of infant health and contributing to alarming rates of infant mortality in some areas. Then came morphine, isolated from opium in the early part of the century. By the mid-Victorian era, particularly with the popularization of the hypodermic syringe, morphine began to gain traction as a more modern and scientific alternative. It could be injected for rapid pain relief, and doctors also prescribed it for severe nervous conditions, including those stubborn cases of insomnia that resisted all other treatments. There was a perception, perhaps, that because it was a purified compound, it was somehow cleaner or more controlled than crude opium or the sometimes variably potent laudanum. So much more refined than just chewing on a poppy head, darling. This comes in a neat vial, administered with a shiny new needle. It's progress, or so the thinking went. Of course, this widespread, easy access to such powerful substances came with a shadow. The addictive nature of opiates was not well understood at first, or at least not widely publicized or acknowledged in the way it is today. The line between medicinal use and dependency was perilously thin and all too easily crossed. You might start taking a few drops of laudanum for sleep, find it wonderfully effective, and then discover that you needed a few more drops the next week, and then a few more. Stopping would lead to unpleasant withdrawal, aches, nausea, tremors, and a return of the insomnia, often worse than before. Many prominent figures of the age, writers like Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Thomas de Quincey, wrote about their own struggles with opium. But it was an everyday tragedy for countless ordinary people too, whose addictions were lived out in quiet desperation. Beyond the readily available laudanum, there were other, more mysterious opium preparations whispered about, like the black drop. This was another tincture of opium, often claimed to be more potent than standard laudanum, or to produce fewer unpleasant side effects like nausea. Recipes for black drop varied. Some were closely guarded family secrets passed down through generations, and it held an almost legendary status among those who sought its profound, dark embrace. Finding a reliable source of good black drop could become something of an obsession for the committed user. Slowly, very slowly, the dangers began to be recognized on a wider scale. The Pharmacy Act of 1868 was a significant, if initially modest, step. This legislation required opiates, along with other substances deemed poisons, to be clearly labeled as such and stipulated that they could only be sold by registered chemists. It didn't ban them, not by a long shot, but it was an acknowledgement that these weren't just benign household remedies. Historians still argue whether the widespread domestic use of opiates during this period was primarily driven by a lack of genuinely effective alternative treatments for pain, anxiety, and distress, or if societal factors, such as the intense pressure for productivity and the prevailing culture of emotional stoicism, contributed significantly to a widespread reliance on self-medication to simply cope with the demands of life. So, as you lie there, perhaps contemplating that small, dark bottle on your nightstand, you are faced with a difficult choice. The promise of oblivion, a temporary cessation of the anxieties that plague you, is incredibly seductive. The gentle, insidious murmur of the opiate seems to offer exactly what you crave. But even then, perhaps a small, lucid part of your mind registers the potential cost. The subtle enslavement that might follow in the wake of that chemically induced peace. The Victorian night for the insomniac was often a tightrope walk between the agony of wakefulness and the perilous allure of these powerful, easily obtained dream weavers. That little dark bottle of laudanum on your nightstand, which we contemplated in the murky depths of your last restless hour, perhaps now seems a stark and somewhat intimidating companion. The swift, certain oblivion it offers might be tempting, but the whispers of its hidden costs, the subtle chains of dependency, might give you pause. And so, with a sigh, you turn your thoughts away from the chemist's potent preparations and look towards a gentler, more ancient source of solace, the garden, and the myriad herbal remedies that generations before you have relied upon. There's an innate comfort, isn't there, in the idea of seeking sleep from the earth itself, from the whispers of willow and the more complex power of the poppy in its raw, botanical form. The appeal of herbal medicine in your Victorian era is strong and deeply rooted. It stands in contrast to some of the harsher, more heroic medical treatments of the day, the aggressive purging, the bleeding, the reliance on strong mineral compounds that could leave a person feeling worse than before. Herbs felt kinder, more natural. Many could be grown in one's own small garden plot, foraged from hedgerows by those with the requisite knowledge, or purchased relatively inexpensively from herbalists or market stalls. There was a familiarity to them, a sense that they were part of a continuous tradition of healing stretching back through time. One of the most popular botanical allies in your fight against insomnia is undoubtedly hops. Yes, the same plant that lends its bitter tang to beer. You might have a hop pillow, a small cushion stuffed with the dried, fragrant, cone-like flowers, as you lay your head down. The idea is that the gentle aroma, that distinct, slightly earthy, resinous scent, will waft upwards, calming your nerves and lulling you into slumber. You'd lay your weary head upon this pillow, hoping the fumes would knock you out. Worst case scenario, you just dreamed you were working in a brewery, which for some might not have been entirely unpleasant. Beyond pillows, hop tea, or a tincture of hops might be taken internally, leveraging the plant's known sedative compounds like lupulin. Then there's lavender. It's instantly recognizable, clean. Floral scent practically synonymous with tranquility. You might have small muslin bags or sachets filled with dried lavender flowers tucked amongst your linens or placed on your bedside table. Lavender water could be sprinkled on your sheets, or a few sprigs burned gently like incense, releasing their calming perfume into the bedroom air. It's a gentle, pervasive presence. designed to soothe the mind through the simple power of aromatherapy, a concept understood in practice, if not always by that name. Chamomile tea is another comforting staple. Just as it often is today, a warm infusion of those small, daisy-like flowers, perhaps sweetened with a little honey, is sipped in the hopes of settling both the stomach and the mind. It's mild. It's gentle, and the ritual of brewing and slowly drinking a warm cup can be a calming routine in itself. Similarly, lemon balm, with its bright, citrusy fragrance, is often turned into a tea to ease nervousness and encourage a more peaceful disposition conducive to sleep. For a slightly more potent herbal intervention, you might turn to valerian. This plant is a stalwart of the herbal pharmacopoeia for sleep and anxiety, but it comes with a rather notorious characteristic: its smell. Valerian root, when dried and prepared, has a very strong, earthy, and, to many noses, deeply unpleasant odor. Renowned for its ability to calm the nerves and summon slumber, it was also renowned for smelling like a locker room filled with ancient, forgotten gym socks. Sweet dreams induced by valerian were sometimes particularly pungent. Despite this olfactory challenge, its effectiveness, or at least its reputation for effectiveness, meant that many Victorians braved the scent, taking it as a tea or, more commonly, a concentrated tincture where the taste and smell could be dispatched more quickly. Passion flower, an exotic arrival from the Americas with its strikingly beautiful and complex flowers, also gained a reputation during your era as a nervine and a treatment for insomnia. Its tendrils and leaves would be used to make infusions or tinctures, adding another option to your growing herbal arsenal. If one herb didn't work, you could always try another. Or perhaps even mix 5 or 6 together in a hopeful, slightly sludgy concoction. The Victorian insomniac was, if nothing else, often an optimistic, if amateur, botanist and experimentalist. Now, we must also speak of the poppy again, but from a different angle. While laudanum and morphine are refined extracts, the poppy plant itself, Papaver somniferum, grows in gardens. Simple home preparations, such as poppy head tea, a decoction made by boiling the dried seed heads after the seeds themselves, used in baking, have been removed, were common domestic remedies, especially in rural areas. This syrup of poppies, or poppy tea, was used to quieten coughs, ease pain, and yes, to bring sleep, particularly to children. It occupied a gray area, a natural remedy from the garden, yet one that delivered a dose of opiates nonetheless, making it effective but also carrying the same risks of dependency and overdose, especially in little ones. It's a stark reminder that natural doesn't always equate to safe. This renewed interest in the power of plants wasn't just isolated folk practice. It was part of a broader cultural current. The Victorian era actually saw a significant resurgence of interest in herbalism. This was partly a reaction against what some perceived as the overly aggressive and sometimes harmful practices of mainstream medicine, and also connected to the Romantic movement's emphasis on nature and natural living. Societies dedicated to herbalism were formed, and books detailing the uses of medicinal plants found a ready audience. People were actively seeking out and sharing knowledge about these botanical cures. Beyond teas and tinctures, you might encounter more whimsical herbal applications for sleep. Imagine a sleepy cap, a specially made nightcap not just for warmth, but lined or filled with a blend of soporific herbs like hops, lavender, and chamomile. You tie it on before bed, immersing your head in a fragrant herbal cloud, hoping to inhale your way to dreamland. Historians still argue whether the efficacy of many popular Victorian herbal sleep remedies was primarily due to their actual pharmacological properties, and some, like hops and valerian, do have recognized active compounds, or the powerful placebo effect combined with the comforting, mindful rituals of their preparation and administration. The very act of gathering herbs, carefully measuring them, steeping a tea, or arranging a scented pillow could, in itself, be a calming pre-sleep routine that helped to quiet the mind. So, as you lie in your bed, perhaps the scent of lavender from a nearby sachet mingles with the faint, lingering aroma of the valerian tea you cautiously sipped earlier. It's a gentler approach than the stark choice offered by the opiate bottle. These herbal whispers from the garden offer a softer kind of magic, a connection to a tradition of natural healing. Whether they truly conquer your stubborn insomnia or merely provide a moment of fragrant, hopeful ritual, they represent another path trodden in the relentless Victorian quest for a good night's rest. The fragrant allure of your herbal remedies, the lavender, the chamomile, the pungent valerian, has perhaps offered a fleeting moment of calm, a gentle suggestion of sleep. But the stubborn gates of true slumber remain firmly closed. Your Victorian resolve, however, is far from depleted. If the subtle chemistry of plants has failed you, perhaps a more elemental force is required. Your weary attention now drifts towards water, that fundamental substance of life, which in your era has been elevated to a potent medicinal tool. You're about to shiver your way through the world of hydrotherapy, where drips, dousings, and downright dramatic immersions are prescribed for a stubborn case of insomnia. Hydropathy, or the water cure, is enjoying immense popularity during your time. Pioneered by figures like Vincent Priestnitz in Silesia and enthusiastically adopted and adapted by practitioners such as Captain R. T. Claridge and, most notably, John Smedley in England. It's seen as a thoroughly natural, even scientific, approach to healing a vast array of ailments. From gout to dyspepsia, from nervous exhaustion to, yes, your relentless wakefulness. Water, in its various temperatures and applications, is hailed as a panacea. Grand hydropathic establishments, like Smedley's imposing institution at Matlock Bath in Derbyshire, have sprung up, attracting thousands of hopeful patients, including even notable figures like Charles Darwin, who sought relief from his chronic illnesses through its rigorous routines. But you don't necessarily need to decamp to a spa. Many of these water-based treatments can be, with a little grim determination, attempted in the privacy of your own home. Prepare yourself. For the Victorian hydrotherapist often placed great faith in the power of cold. The theory was that a shock of cold water would stimulate the body's vital forces, improve circulation, tone the nerves, and encourage the expulsion of toxins. For insomnia, a common prescription might be a cold bath. Imagine, on a chilly Victorian night, with no central heating to look forward to, willingly disrobing and plunging yourself into a tub filled with decidedly icy water. It would most certainly wake you up in the immediate sense, which seems rather counterintuitive for an insomnia cure. But the Victorians were nothing if not committed to their theories, however bracing. The belief was that the initial shock would be followed by a reaction, a rush of warmth as the body fought back, leading to relaxation and, ultimately, sleep. If a full immersion seems too daunting, there's the sitz bath. For this, you'd sit in a shallow basin of cold water, typically deep enough to cover your hips and abdomen, often for a period of 10 to 20 minutes or even longer. The idea here was to draw blood away from your overactive brain towards the lower body, thereby calming mental agitation and promoting drowsiness. You'd sit there, shivering perhaps, contemplating the ceiling, hoping that this localized chilling was indeed soothing your fevered mind. Then there is the quintessential hydropathic treatment, the wet sheet wrap, or the pack. This is where things get truly immersive. You would be stripped bare, and then swiftly and expertly wrapped, mummy style, in a linen sheet that had been thoroughly wrung out in cold water. You'd be wrapped up like a human burrito in cold, damp linen, then swaddled tightly in several heavy woolen blankets, and perhaps a feathered duvet, with only your head exposed. The goal was to trap your body heat, forcing you to sweat profusely. Initially, the sensation is one of profound, damp cold, but gradually, if all goes to plan, your body heat begins to overcome the chill, and you enter a phase of intense sweating, followed by a feeling of languor and, with any luck, sleepiness. You might lie there for an hour or more. A cocoon of dampness and determination. Other cold water applications included cold compresses applied to the head or abdomen, or effusions, where jugs of cold water were poured systematically over your body or specific parts, like the spine, believed to have a particularly potent effect on the nervous system. You might also encounter the Neptune girdle. The Neptune girdle, a delightful overnight accessory for the fashion-conscious insomniac. This involved wearing a damp bandage or compress, usually linen, wrapped around your waist and abdomen, directly against the skin, and leaving it on all night. The theory was that it would maintain a cooling effect on the core, draw heat downwards away from the brain, and thus promote a more tranquil state. Nothing says ready for a good night's sleep like a soggy bandage slowly chilling your midriff as you try to ignore the clammy discomfort. While cold was king for many curative hydrotherapists, warm water wasn't entirely dismissed. A simple warm bath, perhaps with some of those calming herbs like lavender or chamomile added, a little callback to our previous explorations, could be recommended for its relaxing properties, though it was often seen as more of a palliative than a true cure in the dramatic hydropathic sense. The theories underpinning these sometimes rather torturous treatments were a blend of empirical observation, or what seemed like it, and a fervent belief in nature's power to correct bodily imbalances. The shock, the sweating, the shivering, these were all seen as active processes, the body engaging in a vigorous house cleaning, expelling morbid matter and retoning a sluggish system. Historians still argue whether the reported successes of hydrotherapy for insomnia and other nervous conditions were due to the direct physiological effects of the water treatments themselves. The strict, ordered regimen and often healthier diet imposed in hydropathic establishments, the removal from everyday stresses, or a powerful psychosomatic response to such dramatic hands-on interventions. When you're subjected to something so overtly therapeutic, perhaps you're simply more inclined to believe it will work. So, you find yourself toweling off briskly after a chilling sitz bath, or perhaps being unwrapped from your damp cocoon of sheets, feeling either invigorated, exhausted, or just plain cold. The gas lamp casts its flickering light, and you pull your nightclothes on, your skin tingling, your teeth possibly still chattering a little. Will this watery ordeal finally grant you the peace you seek? Or will you simply lie there, cleaner, colder, but just as stubbornly awake, wondering what other peculiar paths to slumber your Victorian world has yet to offer? The cold water compresses have been removed. The damp sheets have been whisked away by a long-suffering housemaid. And you've perhaps even endured the peculiar chill of the Neptune girdle around your waist all night. Yet, despite these valiant, watery efforts, you find yourself staring into the pre-dawn gloom. Sleep still resolutely out of reach. The elemental power of water having proven insufficient, your weary but ever hopeful gaze now turns to one of the most exciting, mysterious, and frankly, slightly alarming forces of your Victorian age, electricity. If nature's simpler remedies have failed, perhaps this modern scientific marvel, this invisible river of power, can jolt your stubborn constitution into a state of repose. Welcome to the world of electric dreams and, occasionally, quite shocking slumbers. Electricity in your era is a captivating enigma. It's the stuff of Frankenstein's reanimated creature in Mary Shelley's Gothic tale, the force that makes frogs' legs twitch in Galvani's famous experiments. It hums with the promise of progress, lighting city streets, powering new industries, and, for many hopeful practitioners and patients, holding the key to curing a host of human afflictions. Medical electricity, or electrification, has become a fashionable, if somewhat vaguely understood, form of treatment, particularly for ailments deemed to be of nervous origin, a category into which your persistent insomnia most certainly falls. So, you might find yourself in the consulting room of a medical electrician, or perhaps your own forward-thinking physician has invested in the impressive, gleaming apparatus. One common method you might encounter is Faradayization. For this, an induction coil, perhaps a handsome brass and mahogany Ruhmkorff coil, would be used to produce an interrupted, alternating current. Damp sponges attached to electrodes, or sometimes metallic handles or rollers, would be pressed against your skin, often on your back, along your spine, or even to your head. You'd feel a distinct buzzing, a tingling, perhaps an involuntary twitching of your muscles as the current passed through. Your friendly Victorian medical electrician would wheel in a device bristling with brass knobs, wires, and humming coils, looking like something that could either cure your sleeplessness or accidentally send you into next Tuesday. Results, one imagines, could indeed vary. Alternatively, you might be treated with galvanism, which involved a direct current from a voltaic pile or a more stable Daniel cell battery. Again, electrodes would be applied, perhaps to your forehead and the nape of your neck, or one to your solar plexus and another to your feet, with the aim of creating a gentle, or not so gentle, flow of electricity through your body. The idea, often quite loosely defined, was to either soothe overexcited nerves that were preventing sleep, or to stimulate sluggish ones if your insomnia was deemed to be from a lack of nervous energy. Sometimes, these treatments were combined with water, in the form of an electric bath, where a mild current was passed through the bath water as you soaked, a rather shocking spa day experience. Then there was Franklinization, or treatment with static electricity. For this, you'd be insulated by sitting on a special stool with glass legs. A friction machine, often a large glass disc or cylinder rotated against silk pads, would generate a powerful static charge, which would then be transferred to your body. You'd literally become charged, your hair perhaps standing on end. The practitioner might then draw sparks from your knuckles or other parts of your body with a metal conductor, accompanied by a sharp crackle and a tiny, visible flash of light. The air around the machine might even carry the distinct, sharp smell of ozone. The whole performance was rather dramatic and intended to impress upon you the potent forces at work. The experience of these treatments was certainly memorable. Beyond the physical sensations, the tingling, the muscle contractions, the occasional unexpected jolt, there was the sheer spectacle of the equipment. The gleaming brass, the intricate wiring, the mysterious glass vials, the faint hum or crackle of the current, it all contributed to an atmosphere of cutting-edge science. Dr. Golding Bird, a respected physician at Guy's Hospital in London, even established a dedicated electrifying room there in the 1840s and wrote extensively on the medical uses of electricity. His work helped to lend a veneer of mainstream medical legitimacy to these practices, moving them somewhat out of the realm of pure quackery, though a healthy dose of skepticism often remained. And if you couldn't make it to a specialist, or preferred to experiment in the privacy of your own home, the Victorian marketplace was ready to oblige. Numerous portable electrotherapy devices became available, widely advertised in newspapers and popular journals. You might purchase Pulvermacher's hydroelectric chains or belts, to be worn against the skin, promising a continuous mild galvanic current, or perhaps a neat little magneto-electric machine, operated by turning a hand crank to generate a current, complete with electrodes to apply to yourself or a willing, or perhaps unwilling, family member. Yes, for a few shillings, you could buy your very own pocket electrifier, perfect for a bit of DIY neural rebalancing before bed. What could possibly go wrong with self-administering electric shocks in your boudoir while trying to relax? For those seeking a more passive approach, there were even quirkier electrical aids. Consider the electric hairbrush, designed with magnetized iron or other metallic components. The claim was that simply brushing your hair would generate a gentle electrical current or align your body's own animal electricity, soothing headaches, calming nerves, and, naturally, promoting a sound night's sleep. Brush your way to a blissful slumber with our patented electric hairbrush. Not only will it tame your unruly locks, but it might just give your brain a gentle nudge, or perhaps a startling jolt, towards the land of Nod. Side effects may include looking permanently surprised, or simply having very well brushed hair while still being wide awake. Similar claims were made for electric corsets and other electrified garments. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of Victorian electrotherapy for insomnia and other nervous complaints stemmed more from the novelty and impressive, almost theatrical nature of the apparatus, creating a powerful placebo effect and a sense of proactive treatment, or from actual subtle physiological changes induced by the electrical currents. However poorly understood their mechanisms were at the time. So, as the practitioner disconnects the wires, or as you unstrap your home electric belt, you're left with a faint tingling sensation. Perhaps the lingering scent of ozone, and a mind buzzing with more than just your usual anxieties. Has this foray into the very current of modern science finally reset your internal clock? Or are you simply a little more energized and still facing the long hours of the night with wide open eyes, wondering if these electric dreams will ever translate into actual, peaceful sleep? The faint scent of ozone from your electrifying encounter has faded, the tingling in your fingertips has subsided, but sleep, that shy creature, remains elusive. You might even feel a little more wired, as if those currents have somehow supercharged your wakefulness. Having braved the jolts and buzzes of modern science to no avail, your weary mind, ever searching, now turns inward towards the more shadowy, less tangible realms of influence, the power of suggestion, the mysteries of the mind itself. You're about to explore the hushed rooms and intense gazes of mesmerism and hypnotism, seeking slumber not through a shock to the system, but through a subtle surrender of the will. The air in the mesmerist salon, or perhaps in a quiet corner of your own drawing room if you've invited a practitioner, is likely thick with anticipation and maybe a hint of theatricality. Mesmerism, or animal magnetism, though originating with Franz Anton Mesmer in the late 18th century, still holds a powerful sway over the Victorian imagination. The theory, as you understand it, involves an invisible universal fluid, a kind of cosmic energy that flows through all living things. illness, including your stubborn insomnia, is thought to be a result of blockages or imbalances in this fluid. The mesmerist, a person supposedly gifted with an abundance of this magnetic force, aims to redirect and rebalance your internal energies. To achieve this, the practitioner might employ a series of slow, deliberate hand movements, known as mesmeric passes. They'll sweep their hands over your body, often without making actual contact, their fingers perhaps lightly tracing the air around your head, your chest, your limbs. The mesmerist would wave their hands around you with intense concentration, a bit like a conductor leading an invisible orchestra whose only job was to make you feel sleepy and hopefully, eventually unconscious. Hopefully, they hit all the right notes for a nocturne. They might fix you with an intense, unwavering gaze, their eyes boring into yours, seeking to establish a powerful connection. Some mesmerists used magnetized objects, or even a baquet, a large tub filled with magnetized water and iron filings, from which protruded iron rods that several patients could hold simultaneously, creating a shared magnetic field. The goal for your insomnia is to calm your agitated nervous system, to soothe your mind into a receptive state, and ultimately to induce a mesmeric sleep, a deep trance considered profoundly restorative. A little later in your era, a more scientific approach emerges with James Braid, a Scottish surgeon, who coins the term hypnotism from the Greek word for sleep, hypnos. Braid sought to distance these phenomena from Mesmer's somewhat mystical fluid theories, proposing instead a physiological explanation. He believed that by inducing fatigue in the nervous system, particularly the optic nerves, a state of nervous sleep or hypnosis could be achieved. So, under the guidance of a hypnotist, you might find yourself instructed to stare fixedly at a bright object, a lancet case, a button, or perhaps a swinging pocket watch, that classic prop of stage hypnotists even then. You'd stare at that shiny button or that gently swaying watch until your eyes crossed, your eyelids grew heavy, and your brain basically said, "All right, I give up, sleep it is." It was the Victorian equivalent of being really, really bored into gentle submission. Once your eyes closed, the hypnotist would employ soothing verbal suggestions, telling you that you are feeling calm, relaxed, heavy, and sleepy, guiding you gently towards the desired state. Whether you're undergoing mesmerism or hypnotism, the experience can be quite profound. As you sit or recline in the dimly lit room, the practitioner's focused attention and often monotonous, soothing voice can indeed lead to a feeling of profound heaviness in your limbs, a warmth spreading through your body, a sense of detachment from your surroundings. Your mind, usually racing with anxieties, might begin to quieten. Some people reported tingling sensations, others a feeling of floating. The power of suggestion is palpable. If you believe this will work, if you allow yourself to be guided, the chances of entering a deeply relaxed, trance-like state are certainly higher. Practitioners of these arts ranged widely. There were serious medical men, like the renowned Dr. John Eliasson, a professor at University College Hospital in London, who controversially championed mesmerism and even used it to perform painless surgeries in the 1840s, a time before chemical anesthetics like ether and chloroform became commonplace. His public demonstrations and insistence on its efficacy in a hospital setting caused a huge uproar and eventually led to his resignation. But it undeniably showed that mesmeric trance could induce profound physiological changes. On the other end of the spectrum were theatrical showmen who used mesmerism and hypnotism for public entertainment. and countless amateur enthusiasts who practiced it in parlors and at social gatherings, sometimes with more enthusiasm than skill. Naturally, these practices were dogged by controversy and skepticism. Accusations of fraud, charlatanism, and simple trickery were rife. Many in the medical establishment dismissed it all as mere imagination or, worse, dangerous manipulation. The line between a genuine therapeutic attempt to induce restorative sleep and a performance designed to awe or entertain was often incredibly blurry. To enhance the mystique or perhaps prolong the effect, a mesmerist might even give you magnetized water to drink at home, or a small mesmerized object, a piece of cloth, a coin, a smooth stone that they had supposedly imbued with their healing magnetic influence. You'd be instructed to hold it or place it under your pillow to aid your sleep. Drink this specially magnetized water 3 times a day and sleep like a baby, they might declare. It often tasted remarkably like regular tap water, but you were assured that the invisible magnetic fluids were diligently working their subtle magic on your behalf. Or perhaps, you muse, it's just promoting good hydration. Historians still argue whether the phenomena observed during mesmeric or hypnotic trances, such as insensibility to pain or the ability to follow post-hypnotic suggestions, represented unique states of consciousness or were simply powerful manifestations of heightened suggestibility, learned role-playing, and an unconscious desire on the part of the subject to meet the practitioner's expectations and the audience's anticipation. As you slowly emerge from the trance, guided back to full awareness by the practitioner's voice, you might feel a lingering sense of calm, a quietness in your mind that wasn't there before. The room seems softer, the gaslight gentler. But the crucial question remains. When you retire to your own bed later tonight, will this mental journey, this dip into the mysterious currents of your own psyche, translate into actual, peaceful, and sustained sleep? Or will the effects dissolve like mist, leaving you once again to face the long, wakeful hours alone with your thoughts? The mesmerist's soothing voice has faded. The intense gaze has been withdrawn, and perhaps you found a fleeting moment of calm in that shadowy salon. But as night deepens in your own familiar bedroom, the old restlessness may creep back. The mental gymnastics of suggestion proving insufficient to truly tether your racing mind. Having explored the mysterious and the medicinal, you might now find yourself yearning for something more straightforward, more tangible. Your thoughts turn to the robust, common-sense advice lauded by physicians and health reformers alike. Vigorous exercise to tire the body and an abundance of fresh air to purify the sleeping chamber. Perhaps you reason the cure for your sleeplessness lies not in potions or psychic influence, but in brisk walks and breezy bedrooms. The Victorian era, for all its industrial grime and urban confinement for some, held a deep-set belief in the virtues of physical exertion. Particularly for your class, the burgeoning middle or the comfortable upper, often engaged in sedentary brain work, physicians warned against the perils of an inactive lifestyle. A tired body, they preached, was the surest precursor to a sound night's sleep. You had to earn your rest, to expend that nervous energy through good, honest physical effort. And so, you might find yourself lacing up your stoutest boots for a brisk constitutional. This isn't a gentle, meandering stroll. This is purposeful walking, often covering several miles at a cracking pace. Regardless of the weather, your Victorian doctor might prescribe a brisk 10-mile walk to be taken in the late afternoon or early evening. Because nothing says ready for slumber like collapsing into bed with thoroughly aching feet and the lingering suspicion you've just walked halfway to the next county. If walking seems too pedestrian, perhaps you engage in horseback riding, a vigorous activity for those with the means, combining fresh air with a thorough workout. Or maybe you've embraced the growing fashion for gymnastics and calisthenics. Home exercise manuals abound, guiding you through routines of stretching, bending, and wielding light dumbbells or Indian clubs in the privacy of your own room. The rhythmic creak of floorboards as you diligently perform your exercises might be a familiar pre-bedtime sound. Later in the era, the safety bicycle would offer another exhilarating and tiring way to seek out that desirable state of physical fatigue. The key in all these pursuits was often intensity. A gentle glow was good, but a thorough fatiguing of the muscles was even better. Alongside this gospel of exercise, there existed an almost fanatical devotion to fresh air and ventilation, especially within the sacred space of the bedroom. This obsession was deeply intertwined with the prevailing miasma theory, the belief that disease and ill health, including sleeplessness, were caused by bad air emanating from decay, stagnant water, or even the exhaled breath of others. Your bedroom, therefore, must be a fortress against such noxious influences, kept constantly refreshed with a through draft of pure, untainted air. Windows were to be flung open with enthusiasm, sometimes for hours each day, and often. A portion was to be left open all night, even in the depths of winter. Waking up with a light dusting of snow on your bedspread or encountering a family of sparrows attempting to nest in your chamber pot was apparently a small price to pay for the perceived benefits of unadulterated oxygen. Fresh air was paramount. Frostbite, it would seem, was considered a rather minor and secondary concern. Architects and builders even incorporated elaborate ventilation systems into newer homes. You might find special air bricks in the walls or Tobin tubes, vertical pipes that drew air from outside and released it at a higher level in the room to avoid direct drafts on the occupants. At least in theory. Patent ventilators of all curious designs were installed in windows and chimneys, all with the aim of ensuring a constant, cleansing airflow. There was considerable debate about the qualities of night air itself. The old fear that night air was inherently damp and dangerous still lingered for some. But the more progressive view was that as long as it was fresh and not stagnant or city polluted, it was beneficial. So, the ideal Victorian bedroom, according to this school of thought, should be cool, even bracingly so. Forget cozy, warm nests. You wanted an environment that invigorated, that promoted a hardy constitution. This preference for coolness extended to bedding. While you might have your heavy blankets, the mattress itself was often firm, even hard. Featherbeds, though luxurious, were sometimes frowned upon by health reformers as being too enervating, too likely to overheat the body and disturb sleep. They believed a hard mattress built character and possibly a rather sore back. The prevailing theory was that sinking into an overly soft, enveloping bed was akin to sinking into moral turpitude and inevitable sleeplessness. So, plank-like rigidity was often the order of the night. This zealous pursuit of fresh air could manifest in some rather specific and quirky contraptions. You might hear tell of, or even possess, an air douche or an aeolian ventilator. These weren't just about generally airing the room. They were devices designed to direct a focused current of fresh, and usually quite cold, air towards a specific point. Often the sleeper's face or head. Some were simple funnels or pipes leading from a window, others more complex mechanical devices. The belief was that this targeted breeze was particularly healthful and a powerful soporific, ensuring you breathed only the purest atmosphere as you slumbered. The drive for exercise was powerfully reinforced by cultural movements such as muscular Christianity, which gained significant traction from the mid-19th century onwards. Promoted by writers like Thomas Hughes and Charles Kingsley, it espoused the idea that physical health, strength, and vigor were essential components of moral and spiritual well-being. Playing sports, engaging in robust outdoor activities, and maintaining a physically fit body were seen as Christian virtues. This philosophy permeated schools, universities, and public discourse, lending further weight to the idea that exercise wasn't just good for the body, but good for the soul, and, by extension, for a peaceful night's sleep. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with bedroom ventilation and the somewhat Spartan conditions it promoted was primarily driven by the emerging scientific theories about airborne disease, oxygen, and the dangers of carbon dioxide buildup, or if it also reflected deeper cultural anxieties about purity, contamination, and the unseen. Invisible dangers that might be lurking within stagnant, enclosed domestic environments. So, you find yourself lying in your cool, airy bedroom, the window cracked open to the night. A faint breeze stirring the heavy curtains. Your muscles ache pleasantly from that long, brisk walk you undertook earlier. You've done everything the sensible advice dictates. You've earned your rest physically, and you're breathing the freshest, purest air your Victorian ingenuity can provide. Will this combination of bodily fatigue and a bracing environment finally be the key? Or will you lie there, admiring the moon through the gap in the curtains, healthily tired but mind stubbornly? Perversely active? The brisk walks have been walked, your muscles are honorably fatigued, and your bedroom window has been faithfully ajar, inviting in those bracing night breezes, possibly along with a curious pigeon or two. Yet, despite your adherence to this sensible regime of physical exertion and meticulous ventilation, you find yourself, once again, gazing into the darkness. Sleep is distant as a star. Having tested the limits of natural philosophy and bodily endurance, your ever-resourceful Victorian mind, steeped in an age of unprecedented invention, now turns with a glimmer of hope towards the shining promise of cogs, springs, and polished brass. If nature, medicine, and mental persuasion have all fallen short, surely a cleverly designed gadget, a mechanical marvel, can engineer the slumber you so desperately crave. Your era, after all, is a veritable explosion of ingenuity. The Great Exhibition of 1851, housed in its magnificent Crystal Palace, showcased a breathtaking array of inventions. From mighty steam engines to delicate household conveniences, all testament to the belief that human cleverness could solve almost any problem. It's only natural that this inventive spirit would extend to the intimate realm of the bedroom, tackling the stubborn challenge of sleeplessness with a delightful, if sometimes bewildering, array of gadgets and gizmos for grogginess. Imagine, if you will, stepping into a showroom, or perhaps perusing the pages of a popular mechanic's journal dedicated to the technology of repose. Here, you might encounter the adult-sized rocking bed. The theory is simple. The gentle, rhythmic motion that soothes an infant to sleep might work just as well for a grown-up. Some of these contraptions are manually operated, requiring a long-suffering spouse or servant to gently sway you into oblivion. Others are more ambitious, featuring clockwork mechanisms or even steam power in their more elaborate and likely hazardous iterations. Imagine a giant mechanical cradle, gently or perhaps not so gently, depending on the engineering, rocking your full-sized adult self. One wrong setting, and you might find yourself unexpectedly launched towards the washstand. But hey, anything for a few precious hours of shut-eye. Remember our previous discussion about ventilation? Some inventors took this to a whole new mechanical level with specially designed ventilating beds. Never mind simply opening a window. Your bed itself could become an atmospheric marvel. These might feature built-in bellows, intricate systems of air channels, or small, hand-cranked fans, all designed to ensure a constant, precisely directed flow of fresh air around your sleeping form. You could probably host a small, breezy tea party in there with all that circulation. Though actually sleeping through the wheezing of the bellows might still be an optional extra. Other beds focused on posture. Certain sleeping positions were deemed detrimental, thought to induce nightmares, snoring, a problem for your bedfellow, if not directly for your own insomnia, though the worry about it could keep you up, or general unease. So, you might find beds with curious built-in bumps, ridges, or strategically placed inclines, designed to subtly, or perhaps not so subtly, nudge you into a medically approved, sleep-conducive posture. Comfort, it would seem, was often a secondary consideration to achieving scientifically sanctioned slumber. Beyond the bed itself, a host of smaller devices vied for your attention. Pillows, for instance, were not just simple bags of feathers anymore. You might find them sculpted into specific orthopedic shapes or filled with unusual materials like cooled water or special grades, all promising to support the head and neck in just the right way or to keep the brain from overheating, a common suspected cause of wakefulness. Straps and mild harnesses, though thankfully nothing too alarming, were even patented, intended to gently encourage a particular sleeping posture throughout the night. The sounds of the night, or the lack thereof, were also targets for Victorian inventors. If the silence was deafening or punctuated by disturbing city noises, you might try newly fashionable earplugs, crafted from materials like gutta percha, beeswax, or cotton wool. For those who found gentle, monotonous sounds soothing, perhaps a music box with a particularly repetitive and calming lullaby, or an early attempt at a white noise generator, maybe a small, clockwork device that produced a gentle whirring or humming, could be employed to mask other disturbances and ease the mind. Light, too, was to be managed with mechanical precision. Elaborate curtain-drawing mechanisms, operated by ropes and pulleys, could ensure your room was plunged into perfect, Stygian darkness. Special shades for night lights were designed to emit only the faintest, most scientifically approved level of illumination. Just enough to prevent you from tripping over the commode, but not enough to excite the optic nerve. Later in your century, and stretching into the early Edwardian period, figures like Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, of breakfast cereal fame, became renowned for his inventive health contraptions at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. While his focus was broad, therapies for nervousness and insomnia were key. He designed mechanical vibrating chairs and beds, believing that these vibrations could soothe the nerves, improve circulation, and promote restful sleep. Imagine being gently, or perhaps quite vigorously, vibrated in a large, padded chair, the hum of the motor a modern lullaby, as you hoped for that elusive drowsiness. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of these often quite complex sleep-related gadgets during the Victorian era reflected a genuine, scientifically grounded belief in their efficacy, or was more a testament to burgeoning Victorian consumerism, a fascination with novelty, and the pervasive desire for quick, tangible solutions in an age increasingly captivated by technology and the promise of mechanical fixes for all of life's discomforts. So, you find yourself in your bedroom, perhaps lying on your posture-correcting mattress, your head nestled on a water-cooled pillow, a gentle breeze wafting from your bed's own ventilation system. and the faint whir of a sound machine in the corner. You are a marvel of modern sleep engineering. But as you lie there, surrounded by these ingenious, earnest, and sometimes faintly ridiculous contraptions, the question remains, will all this meticulous mechanical effort finally lull your restless Victorian mind to sleep? Or are you simply more comfortably, more scientifically, and perhaps more comically, awake than ever before? Your bedroom, once a hopeful laboratory of sleep-inducing contraptions, now feels a little like a museum of failed inventions. The rocking mechanism on your patent bed lies still. The ventilating tubes whistle faintly with a draft that brings no drowsiness, and the water-cooled pillow feels merely damp. Having explored the mechanical, the medicinal, the botanical, and even the electrical, and finding them all wanting, a new and unsettling thought may begin to take root in your weary, wakeful Victorian mind. What if the fault lies not in your mattress, your diet, or the air you breathe, but within yourself? What if your persistent insomnia is a reflection of your character, a symptom of some inner moral or mental failing? This is virtue's rest versus vice's vigil, where the inability to sleep could become a heavy, judgmental burden in your era. Sleep is often portrayed not merely as a physiological necessity, but as a kind of reward, a divine blessing bestowed upon the virtuous and the industrious. The sleep of the just is a common refrain, implying that those with a clear conscience and a day well spent will naturally drift off into peaceful slumber. So, if you find yourself tossing and turning, night after night, it's an uncomfortable but logical leap to wonder about the state of your own soul. Couldn't sleep? Perhaps you forgot to pay the milkman on time, entertained a slightly too racy thought about your dashing neighbor's new cravat, or spoke a sharp word to the undercook. The Victorian conscience, you see, could be a remarkably sensitive instrument, apparently directly wired to the Sandman's off switch. The quiet, lonely hours of the night naturally lend themselves to introspection. And for the sleepless Victorian, this could easily morph into a distressing moral inventory. This internal scrutiny was sometimes even formalized. Some devout individuals practiced a kind of nighttime self-examination, or kept a moral diary, where they would meticulously review their actions, words, and thoughts of the preceding day before attempting to compose themselves for sleep. While intended to promote spiritual growth, if you uncovered a litany of minor sins or perceived shortcomings, this earnest practice could inadvertently fuel your anxiety and make sleep even more elusive, transforming your bed into a miniature courtroom of the soul. Beyond specific transgressions, your general lifestyle might come under suspicion. If you were of a more comfortable class, perhaps your insomnia was subtly attributed to a life of excessive luxury or idleness, a lack of good, honest physical toil that truly tired the body and satisfied the mind. Or perhaps you were overstimulating your delicate nervous system with unhealthy pursuits, reading those thrilling, triple-decker novels full of dastardly villains, dramatic escapes, and swooning heroines right before bed. TSK. According to some moralists, you were practically inviting a sleepless night of moral agitation and an overtaxed imagination. You should have stuck to a calming book of sermons or a treatise on domestic economy. Even engaging in too much frivolous socializing, attending late-night balls, or indulging in rich foods and stimulating conversation deep into the evening could be pinpointed as culprits, not just for their physical effects, but for their perceived moral lightness. Then there's the matter of mental fortitude. We've touched upon neurasthenia and the pressures of brain work before. But here it takes on a character dimension, an inability to cope with the intellectual demands of your profession or to effectively switch off your brain at night. might be seen not just as an unfortunate affliction, but as a sign of a somewhat weak mental constitution, a lack of necessary self-discipline. Can't quiet your mind at 3 a.m. as it rehearses business worries or replays social slights. Clearly, according to some stern internal or external critics, you just weren't willing it hard enough. A bit more of that famous Victorian stiff upper lip and a stern internal lecture about the virtues of shutting down your brain on command should surely do the trick. Or so the frustratingly simplistic thinking went. For women, the diagnosis of insomnia could be even more readily tied to perceived inherent weaknesses. Hysteria, that catch-all diagnosis for a multitude of female complaints, was often implicated. A woman's more delicate nervous system was thought to be exquisitely prone to disturbances that could manifest as sleeplessness, her emotional sensitivity seen as both a virtue and a vulnerability. The fear of insanity also loomed large in the Victorian mind. Prolonged, intractable insomnia was often viewed with a kind of cold dread, as it was widely believed to be a potential precursor to a complete mental breakdown. The night, therefore, could become a terrifying vigil, not just against sleeplessness itself, but against the perceived threat of losing your sanity, each wakeful hour a step closer to some imagined abyss. This terror, of course, would only serve to chase sleep further away. Religious beliefs naturally played a role too. Sleep was often understood as a gift from God, a period of sacred rest and restoration. If this gift was withheld, it could be interpreted as a trial of faith, a spiritual test you were meant to endure with patience and prayer. Some might even harbor a private, unspoken fear that their sleeplessness was a subtle sign of divine displeasure, a hidden judgment on some unacknowledged aspect of their lives. Seeking divine aid through fervent nighttime prayers for deliverance into slumber was a common recourse. The importance of an orderly life, reflecting an orderly mind and moral standing, was relentlessly emphasized in the popular conduct manuals and self-help literature of the day. Books like Mrs. Beeton's famous Book of Household Management, while primarily focused on domestic efficiency, also promoted a vision of a well-regulated home and life as foundational to happiness and virtue. This ethos implicitly suggested that good habits, including those that fostered sleep, were part of a morally upright existence. Deviations, like chronic wakefulness, didn't quite fit the pattern. Historians still argue whether the intense moral scrutiny applied to conditions like insomnia in the Victorian era was a genuine reflection of deeply held religious and ethical beliefs that permeated all aspects of life, or if it also subtly served as a form of social control, reinforcing societal norms about productivity, emotional discipline, and what constituted acceptable expressions of distress or suffering. So, as you lie there, the weight of your wakefulness is now compounded by a subtle, or perhaps not so subtle, layer of self-reproach or the imagined judgment of others. It's not just that you can't sleep, it's that perhaps, on some level, you feel you don't deserve to. Or that your inability is a shameful secret, a testament to some hidden flaw. This moralizing of sleeplessness adds another cruel twist to your nightly struggle, making the already difficult quest for rest an even more complex and burdensome affair. That heavy cloak of self-reproach, the nagging suspicion that your sleeplessness is somehow your own moral or mental failing, can become utterly exhausting. You've tried to be virtuous, disciplined, and strong-willed, yet here you are, staring into the relentless darkness. And it's in this state of weary vulnerability, when your internal resolve is at its lowest ebb, that the siren song of the patent medicine peddler begins to sound particularly sweet and alluring. Flickering through the pages of your newspaper, or gazing at a brightly colored poster on a hoarding. Your eyes snag on promises of instant relief, of elixirs of ease, and a swift, uncomplicated end to your nightly torment. Welcome, tired friend, to the bustling, booming, and often treacherous world of Victorian quackery. The patent medicine trade in your era is a phenomenon, a veritable free-for-all. With minimal government regulation to speak of, almost anyone can bottle a concoction, slap an impressive-sounding label on it, and market it with the most extravagant claims imaginable. Newspapers and magazines are crammed with advertisements for nerve tonics, restorative cordials, soothing syrups, and grand invigorators, many of which explicitly promise to conquer sleeplessness, banish anxiety, and restore youthful vitality. The advertisements were masterpieces of persuasive, if not entirely truthful, creative writing, promising that just one swig of Aunt Agatha's angelic dream draught would not only cure your insomnia, but probably also regrow your thinning hair and perhaps even find you a wealthy and amiable spouse. Testimonials, of course, were always glowing, often attributed to a grateful mother or a restored gentleman, and entirely verifiable by absolutely no one of consequence. These remedies appeal directly to your desperation and to your desire for a discreet, self-administered solution that doesn't involve another consultation with a physician who might just tell you to try harder or open a window wider. The allure is powerful, a simple purchase. A few spoonfuls, and blessed oblivion could be yours, with no judgment attached. But what, you might cautiously wonder, is actually in these miracle cures? That, my dear insomniac, is often a closely guarded and frequently alarming secret. Many of these nerve soothers and sleep promoters owed their effects, if any, to generous doses of alcohol, sometimes shockingly high percentages. Others relied on the familiar embrace of opiates like laudanum or morphine, conveniently disguised with flavorings and a fancy name. A little callback to our earlier, more direct encounters with those substances, now appearing in commercial masquerade. Cocaine, cannabis, chloral hydrate, and other potent, addictive drugs could also be found lurking in these brightly labeled bottles, their presence unacknowledged. The secret ancient herbal formula in Professor Phineas Flummery's celebrated sleep elixir, for instance, often turned out to be composed primarily of 80% cheap gin and a significant dash of opium tincture, a recipe less ancient and mysterious and more whatever was readily available behind the pub that week. Of course, some elixirs were entirely inert, perhaps just colored water and sugar, relying solely on the potent magic of the placebo effect and the purchaser's fervent hope. And then there are the charismatic figures behind these concoctions, the quack doctors and persuasive charlatans. They might be itinerant professors of physic, rolling into town with a horse-drawn cart laden with bottles and a well-rehearsed spiel. They could be suave specialists with consulting rooms in fashionable streets, or anonymous figures operating mail-order empires built on newspaper ads and promises whispered through the postal service. These individuals are masters of pseudoscientific jargon, often boasting qualifications from non-existent universities or citing impenetrable research. The traveling nerve specialist would gaze into your eyes with profound sagacity, perhaps tap your knee with a pencil or a silver letter opener, and then solemnly declare your vital humors or nervous ethers to be in a frightful tangle. A perilous condition only treatable by his exclusive 20 guinea course of patent brain bombs or nocturnal normalizers. conveniently available for purchase directly from the back of his cart, or his slightly dusty consulting room. They sell not just a product, but hope. They offer a sympathetic ear for a price, validating your suffering and assuring you that their unique remedy holds the key. You might even encounter those who peddle electric or magnetic wonders for your sleeplessness, perhaps special insoles for your shoes, a belt to wear around your waist, or a curious metal amulet, all claiming to rebalance your body's invisible energies and draw out the morbid influences that cause insomnia. Often, these items contain no actual source of electricity or magnetism beyond their suggestive names, being just another way to part a desperate person from their cash. For you, the weary insomniac, the cycle often begins with a flare of optimism. If the chosen elixir contains a hefty dose of alcohol or opiates, you might indeed experience some initial drowsiness or a dulling of your anxieties. It works, you might exclaim, a surge of relief washing over you. But this relief can be short-lived. The underlying causes of your insomnia remain unaddressed, and soon you may find you need a larger dose to achieve the same effect, or that the cure itself begins to cause new problems, grogginess, digestive upset, or the insidious creep of addiction. The sheer scale of this problem, this trade in false hope and hidden dangers, would eventually lead to public outcry and governmental action. Though much of that reform would occur just after your main Victorian period, exemplified by exposés like Samuel Hopkins Adams' The Great American Fraud series, which began in 1905, revealing the shocking contents of many popular remedies. But during your sleepless nights, these regulations are still a distant dream. Historians still argue whether the widespread Victorian consumption of patent medicines was primarily fueled by a genuine lack of effective orthodox medical treatments for many common and distressing ailments like chronic insomnia, or if it was more a consequence of increasingly sophisticated advertising techniques preying on a public that was becoming more literate, more accustomed to consumer choice, and perhaps more eager for quick fixes and convenient self-medication in a rapidly changing, often stressful society. So, you find yourself perhaps adding another ornate bottle to your collection on the nightstand. It's labeled promising peaceful slumber assured. You take the prescribed spoonful, the liquid often cloyingly sweet or sharply alcoholic, and you lie back, waiting for the promised miracle. Will this be the one? Or is it just another expensive detour on your long, dark road? Another testament to the persuasive power of those who queue up to profit from your pain? The gaudy labels of those patent medicine bottles now seem to mock you from your nightstand. Their promises of peaceful slumber assured having dissolved into yet more wakeful nights, perhaps accompanied by a lingering peculiar taste or a slight dent in your finances. Disenchanted with the blatant chicanery of quacks and their dubious elixirs, you resolve to seek guidance from more legitimate sources. Surely, you think, the established medical professionals, with their formal training and learned societies, or the weighty wisdom contained within popular health manuals, will offer a clearer, more consistent path to overcoming your relentless insomnia. You are about to peruse the doctor's dictums and sleepy scrolls of your era, hoping for clarity, but quite possibly finding a new landscape of contradiction. Stepping into your physician's surgery, with its familiar scent of carbolic soap, old leather, and decaying paper, you present your case. The doctor, a figure of authority and learning, will likely listen with a serious air, perhaps taking your pulse, peering at your tongue, and inquiring deeply into the state of your digestion, a perennial concern in Victorian medicine. He'll want to know about your bowel habits, the nature of your nerves, your daily routine, and any particular worries that might be preying on your mind. Having heard your tale of woe, he might prescribe a tonic, perhaps something containing iron to enrich your blood, quinine for vigor, or even a touch of strychnine, which, rather ironically for an insomniac, was a nerve stimulant believed in small doses to tone a weakened nervous system. If he deems your nerves particularly frayed, he might suggest bromides. Potassium bromide and other bromide salts became increasingly popular later in your century as sedatives, often seen as a safer alternative to the opiates we've discussed. However, they came with their own set of problems, including the risk of bromism, a rather unpleasant condition characterized by acne, lethargy, and cognitive dulling if taken in excess. Or perhaps he'll return to familiar advice, urging more rigorous adherence to a specific diet or regimen of exercise. Have you really been walking those 10 miles daily? Or more diligent ventilation of your sleeping quarters, perhaps with a detailed diagram of how to achieve optimal cross breezes. The challenge arises when you realize that Dr. Smith's advice might be quite different from Dr. Jones's down the street, or from the pronouncements of the specialist you consulted last month. 1 week, Dr. Grumbles might advise a diet consisting solely of bland gruel, tepid milk, and solitary contemplation before bed for your insomnia. The next week, perhaps feeling more optimistic, Dr. Sprightly could passionately prescribe vigorous nightly polkas, a hearty beefsteak supper, and a rousing game of charades to thoroughly tire you out. You might begin to suspect they are making some of it up as they go along, possibly comparing contradictory notes over a pint at their local gentlemen's club. One might advocate for absolute, tomb-like quiet, while another suggests that a gentle, monotonous background sound is beneficial. Cold baths versus warm baths, heavy suppers versus light, sleeping on your right side versus your left. The medical opinions could be bewilderingly diverse. Frustrated by this lack of professional consensus, you might turn to the burgeoning market of popular health manuals and domestic medicine books. Titles like The Family Physician, The Household Guide to Health, or Gunn's Domestic Medicine and American Tome, but its kind was widely popular in Britain too, grace many a Victorian bookshelf. These hefty volumes, often passed down through families, aim to provide comprehensive advice on maintaining health and treating illness at home. Within their densely printed pages, you'd find chapters dedicated to wakefulness, sleeplessness, or disorders of the nerves. These sections would typically list a bewildering array of potential causes, from indigestion and constipation to overwork, grief, or even excessive study, followed by an equally long list of potential remedies. Your trusty, comprehensive compendium of approved cures for man and domestic beast might list 73 different and varied remedies for persistent wakefulness, ranging from the somewhat sensible avoid strong tea in the evening to the rather more esoteric anoint the temples with fresh eel skin or recite multiplication tables backwards until drowsiness ensues. At this point, the eel skin is perhaps looking surprisingly tempting, if only for its novelty. Much of the advice found in these printed scrolls would echo what you've heard before. The importance of regularity in all habits, sleep, meals, work, and even recreation. Avoiding mental excitement before bed was a constant refrain. No stimulating books. So, that meant your recently acquired and riveting copy of The Principles of Modern Municipal Drainage Systems was perfectly fine. But the lurid adventures of the one-eyed pirate queen of Madagascar was definitely out. Oh, the sacrifices one must make for sleep. Ensuring a dark, quiet room and a comfortable bed were also standard, though as we've seen, comfortable could be a rather subjective and sometimes austere Victorian concept. The Victorian era was a time of significant medical advancement, but also one where new theories and fads could quickly gain traction and just as quickly fall out of favor. As new understandings of the nervous system, digestion, or the body's vital forces emerged, so too did new therapeutic approaches for insomnia, some more soundly based than others, adding another layer of options and potential confusion for you to navigate. While specialization in medicine was certainly on the rise, with nerve specialists or early neurologists beginning to appear, your common or garden insomnia would most likely be managed by a general physician whose knowledge, while broad, might not always be particularly deep or up-to-date in this specific, troublesome area. Dedicated sleep medicine as a distinct field was still many decades in the future. Sometimes, the advice in these manuals or from physicians could be remarkably specific, venturing into the realm of quirky personal theories. You might be meticulously instructed on your sleeping posture, not just for general health, but specifically to combat insomnia. For instance, always sleeping on your right side was sometimes advised to supposedly ease the work of the heart and aid digestion. Conversely, sleeping on your left or flat on your back might be cautioned against. Some even warned against sleeping with your arms thrown above your head, as this posture was thought to draw too much blood to the brain, thereby causing excitement and wakefulness. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume and often contradictory nature of medical advice for insomnia available to Victorians reflected a genuine, albeit nascent and sometimes fumbling, scientific inquiry into a complex and poorly understood problem, or if it was more indicative of the medical profession's ongoing struggle to assert its authority and efficacy in a crowded marketplace, competing against folk remedies, patent medicines, and a public increasingly empowered by access to printed self-help ideologies. So, you find yourself armed with a sheaf of notes from various doctors, your health manual dog-eared at the chapter on sleeplessness, and a mind swimming with conflicting instructions. You are to be regular but not rigid, well-fed but not overstuffed, active but not agitated, in a room that is airy but not drafty, dark but not oppressive. It's a daunting list of often incompatible requirements, leaving you perhaps more perplexed than peaceful, and the path to a good night's rest still shrouded in a fog of well-meaning but muddled medical advice. You've navigated a bewildering maze of doctors' dictums and the often conflicting wisdom of sleepy scrolls, emerging perhaps more confused than comforted. The sheer variety of advice, from a regimen of brisk 10-mile walks to the anointing of your temples with eel skin, might leave you feeling that the medical profession, for all its learned airs, is still fumbling in the dark as much as you are. But what happens when these fumbling attempts, these earnest prescriptions, or your own desperate forays into the world of potent remedies go terribly wrong? We now turn, with a softer tread, to the darker side of this relentless quest, to the cures that could kill and the remedies that brought only ruin. The shadow of addiction, particularly to opiates, looms large over your Victorian nights. We've touched on laudanum and morphine as readily available sleep aids, but the reality for many who sought their embrace was a slow, insidious slide into dependency. That initial blissful drowsiness, that welcome silencing of a racing mind, could become a cruel trap. The few drops that once brought peace would no longer suffice. You'd need more, and then more still, just to feel normal. just to keep the terrifying specters of withdrawal at bay. The aching limbs, the nausea, the cold sweats. The return of your insomnia with a vengeance. The Victorian quest for a good night's sleep sometimes felt like a precarious tightrope walk over a chasm of oops. That was a bit too much laudanum. The safety net, unfortunately, was often constructed from more laudanum. Accidental overdoses were a grim reality, with laudanum sold in varying strengths and self-administration being the norm. A miscalculation, an extra spoonful in a moment of desperate fatigue, could easily lead to respiratory depression, coma, and death. This wasn't just a risk for adults seeking solace. The widespread use of opiate-laced soothing syrups for infants, as we've noted, had tragic consequences, contributing to countless infant deaths or, for those who survived, to a childhood marred by ill health and developmental problems. The very potion given to quiet a baby's cries could silence them forever. Alcohol, too, extracted a heavy toll. That seemingly harmless nightcap of brandy or porter, so often recommended to relax the nerves before bed, could easily become a nightly necessity, then a crutch. And finally, a full-blown dependency. Many patent medicines, masquerading as nerve tonics or sleep elixirs, contained shockingly high percentages of alcohol, leading unsuspecting individuals down the path to alcoholism while they believed they were taking a legitimate medical treatment. The long-term health consequences, liver disease, gastritis, delirium tremens, would hardly be conducive to restful sleep, creating a vicious cycle of illness and addiction. Even substances promoted as safer alternatives had their perils. Bromides, for instance, lauded for a time as less dangerous sedatives than opiates, could lead to a debilitating condition known as bromism if taken chronically or in high doses. Imagine seeking relief from sleeplessness and instead developing persistent acne, profound lethargy, memory loss, depression, or even psychotic episodes. It was a peculiar sort of medical catch-22. Your insomnia is terrible, so here's a potion that might give you sleep, but also a spectacular skin rash, a charming tremor, and a deep, abiding desire for more of the very potion that's making you unwell. Progress. Another powerful sedative that gained popularity in the latter half of your century was chloral hydrate. It was undeniably effective at inducing sleep, but its therapeutic window was dangerously narrow. An overdose could easily suppress respiration and heart function. And it was particularly lethal when combined with alcohol, a notorious pairing sometimes known as a Mickey Finn. The desire for a deep, untroubled sleep could, with chloral hydrate, lead to a sleep from which one never awakened. A particularly infamous concoction that illustrates this perilous landscape was chlorodyne, developed by a Dr. John Collis Brown. This patent medicine was a potent cocktail of morphine, cannabis, and chloroform, among other ingredients. It was marketed as a remedy for a vast range of ailments: coughs, colds, cholera, diarrhea, and, of course, as a powerful sedative and anodyne. And it worked, remarkably so, at suppressing symptoms. But it was also fiercely addictive and incredibly dangerous. When a cup of chamomile tea and a brisk walk just didn't cut it, and Dr. Brown's chlorodyne promised to silence not just your nagging cough, but possibly your entire overactive nervous system. The temptation for a truly quiet night was, for some, understandably strong, despite the clear and present dangers. Even the more seemingly benign treatments could have their downsides if pursued to extremes. Rigorous hydrotherapy routines in cold, damp conditions could lead to pneumonia or utter exhaustion. Home electrotherapy devices, if faulty or improperly used, could cause burns, painful shocks, or nerve irritation. Drastic dietary restrictions, undertaken in the hope of calming the system, might result in malnutrition and a worsening of overall health. The human cost of these failed cures was immense. Lives were derailed by addiction, health irrevocably damaged. Fortunes could be squandered in the relentless pursuit of expensive quack remedies or costly substances. Reputations were ruined, families thrown into distress. And there was the profound, tragic irony of individuals who, in their desperate search for the simple, natural blessing of sleep, found only deeper suffering, chronic illness, or even an untimely death. In the most extreme cases, individuals whose mental and physical health had been shattered by their insomnia and the dangerous cures they had pursued might find themselves committed to an asylum under the provisions of legislation like the Lunacy Act of 1890, which consolidated the framework for the care of those deemed insane, a start into a search for peace. Historians still argue whether the Victorian medical establishment and the general public were largely naive about the truly addictive and dangerous potential of many commonly used substances like opiates, chloral hydrate, or the potent ingredients in remedies like chlorodyne, or if, perhaps, there was a degree of willful blindness at play. A tacit acceptance of the risks driven by the overwhelming and desperate need for effective remedies in an era with genuinely limited therapeutic options for pain, anxiety, and chronic sleeplessness. So, as you reflect on the myriad cures you've encountered on this journey, it's a sobering thought that for some of your contemporaries, the quest did not lead to gentle slumber, but to a far darker, more permanent silence, or a life irrevocably altered by the very remedies they hoped would save them. The journey through those gaslit Victorian nights, with their strange concoctions, earnest gadgets, and often terrifying remedies, has been a long and shadowy one. As we emerge from the chilling tales of cures that killed and the desperate pursuit of slumber that sometimes led only to ruin, you might find yourself blinking in the metaphorical daylight, relieved to be back in your own, hopefully more peaceful, century. And yet, as your eyes adjust, you may start to notice some surprisingly familiar shapes in the landscape of your own bedroom. Faint but distinct echoes of those Victorian anxieties and ideas about sleep, still whispering to us across the decades. Consider the sheer pressure. Your Victorian counterpart, particularly if engaged in brain work, felt the keen anxiety of needing sleep to maintain mental acuity and productivity. Does that sound entirely alien? In our own era of relentless performance metrics and optimization, we too often view sleep not just as rest, but as a vital tool for peak cognitive function, for acing that presentation, for staying ahead. Victorians had their complicated ventilating beds and rigid routines. We have sophisticated sleep tracking apps that scold us if our sleep efficiency score drops below an arbitrary 85%. Progress means now your phone can judge your slumber, not just your conscience. The fear of not getting enough sleep, and the anxiety it generates, is a thread that binds our centuries tightly together. And what about the constant hum of information? They fretted about the overstimulation of reading too many thrilling novels or newspapers late into the night. You, on the other hand, might find yourself in a nightly battle with the infinite scroll of social media, the 24/7 news cycle, or that one last urgent email. Your brain buzzing with a digital intensity they could scarcely have imagined. They worried about reading too many novels. We worry about one more scroll through social media turning our brains into caffeinated squirrels at 3 a.m. The delivery system for anxiety and information overload has certainly improved with modern technology, but the fundamental challenge to a quiet mind at bedtime remains remarkably similar. The Victorian obsession with controlling the bedroom environment, the meticulous ventilation, the quest for perfect darkness and quiet, also finds its modern reflection. We may have swapped their fear of miasma for a concern about allergens and air purifiers, their heavy velvet curtains for blackout blinds. But the desire to create a perfectly optimized sleep sanctuary persists. We meticulously adjust thermostats, invest in white noise machines, and debate the ideal thread count for our sheets, all in pursuit of that elusive perfect night. This drive to control our surroundings in search of better sleep is a direct descendant of those earnest Victorian efforts. Many of their cures, stripped of their more dangerous elements, are still very much with us. Remember those herbal remedies? Lavender, chamomile, and valerian remain popular go-tos for calming nerves and inviting sleep. Their gentle, natural appeal enduring. We've swapped laudanum for lavender-infused everything and sleepy time, teas boasting 20 different carefully selected herbs. It's certainly gentler and far safer, sure, but that hopeful optimism that this particular leaf or flower will finally be the one is a familiar Victorian echo from Section 5. The dietary advice, too, resonates. Avoiding caffeine and heavy meals before bed is standard modern guidance, just as many Victorian physicians advised. Even if their rationale sometimes involved balancing the bodily humors rather than understanding metabolic processes. And the comforting ritual of warm milk before bed? That's a tradition that has gently tiptoed through generations. The inventive, often bizarre, mechanical contraptions Victorians hoped would engineer their slumber have their modern descendants too. Their rocking beds and ventilating mattresses have evolved into our smart beds that adjust firmness, temperature, and even gently wake us at the optimal point in our sleep cycle. Their basic earplugs find their counterpart in noise-canceling headphones. The spirit of finding a technological fix, a gadget for grogginess as we explored in Section 10, is alive and well. Evidenced by the booming market for sleep trackers, weighted blankets, light therapy lamps, and myriad other devices promising a scientifically managed path to rest. Even the more mind-focused approaches have their parallels. While mesmerism and hypnotism, with their theatrical flair, might seem a world away, the core idea of using suggestion and focused relaxation to calm an anxious mind and induce a sleep-like state can be seen in modern hypnotherapy for insomnia, guided meditations, mindfulness practices, and progressive muscle relaxation techniques. The aim, to quiet the internal chatter and invite mental peace, remains strikingly consistent. And, sadly, the lure of the quick fix, so potent in the age of patent medicines, still thrives. Instead of Dr. Nightingale's nocturnal nectar, we might be tempted by over-the-counter sleep aids or unregulated online supplements promising instant, effortless slumber, sometimes with similarly unproven claims or unforeseen side effects. Researchers today still debate the precise long-term efficacy and potential dependency issues related to the consistent use of even seemingly gentle over-the-counter sleep aids like certain antihistamine, Ines, or even the popular supplement melatonin, echoing some of the past concerns with Victorian remedies that were initially thought to be harmless. The discovery of melatonin in the 20th century and the subsequent understanding of its crucial role in regulating our circadian rhythms provided a firm scientific basis for the importance of light in deep darkness and sleep-wake cycles, something Victorians intuitively grasped with their emphasis on dark rooms and regular routines, but without understanding the underlying biochemistry. Yet, Even with this knowledge, we struggle. And what of that subtle moral judgment? While we might not explicitly blame insomnia on a guilty conscience as readily as some Victorians did, there can still be a whisper of self-reproach if we fail to adhere to the ever-expanding list of sleep hygiene rules. Can't sleep? Perhaps you had that late afternoon coffee, or looked at a screen too close to bedtime, or failed to meditate with sufficient diligence. The modern wellness culture, for all its benefits, can sometimes frame perfect sleep as another achievement, another marker of a well-lived, disciplined life, leading to a new kind of performance anxiety. We see this in trends like clean sleeping, an almost ritualistic, sometimes expensive, pursuit of sleep purity with elaborate bedtime routines, organic bedding, and specific dietary restrictions that carry a feint. Anachronistic with a Victorian self-improvement and anxiety about bodily purity. So, as you dim your own lights tonight, perhaps you'll recognize that the quest for a good night's rest is a timeless human endeavor filled with hope, anxiety, ingenuity, and sometimes a touch of absurdity. The landscape of our nights has changed, but the echoes of those Victorian bedrooms, with all their peculiar challenges and inventive solutions, linger on, a gentle reminder that the mystery of sleep, and our often fraught relationship with it, continues to unfold. And so, our long journey through the shadowed bedrooms and flickering gaslight of the Victorian era, with its earnest and often peculiar quest for slumber, now gently draws to a close. We've walked alongside those restless souls, felt the chill of their water cures, inhaled the pungent aromas of their herbal remedies, and perhaps even sensed the faint tingle of their electrifying contraptions. We've shared in their hopes, their anxieties, and their often misguided efforts to find that elusive, precious peace that only a good night's sleep can bring. The echoes of their struggles, as we've seen, still resonate softly in our own modern nights, a gentle reminder that the desire for rest is a deeply human, utterly timeless need. But now, it is time to let those Victorian ghosts drift back into the mists of history, to release their worries and their strange, sometimes perilous, cures into the quiet archives of the past. The anxieties of that age need no